thank you for taking time out to attend the Harvard Alumni for Education webinar featuring Stanford Professor Joe Boaler, author of Limitless Mind. My name is Carlos Obando. I'm the founder of Harvard Alumni for Education, Seattle chapter. First, some introductions, some thank yous, and then we can get started with our event. Please permit me to formally thank Harvard, Stanford, and Seattle University for making this event possible. Our format today is a discussion with Dr. Boaler. Joe, is that okay with you?
Joe, yes, that's great.
Okay, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. Joe, we understand you have a class to teach after this.
That's right. So, my class starts at 1 o'clock.
All right, so we'll be having a hard stop at 12:50. My co-host for the event is Dr. Theodora Schumann, Packard Professor and Department Chair of Mechanical Engineering at the Seattle University College of Science and Engineering. And Theodora, I understand you've got some students participating today.
Yes, we have a whole bunch of mechanical engineering juniors joining us, but also a large number of professors from Seattle U are in the attendance.
Okay, finally, permit me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Joe Boaler. Joe is the Nomalini Olivier Professor of Education at Stanford University and co-founder of ucube.org. She's the author of 11 books, including What's Math Got to Do With It and Mathematical Mindsets. She's the recipient of the NCSM Award for Equity, the author of the first MOOC on mathematics learning for teachers and parents, and a White House presenter on equity. She's currently co-leading a K-12 data science initiative and was named as one of the 8 educators changing the face of education by the BBC. She's a member of the Stanford Neurosciences Institute. And Joe, that's where I'd like to start, is to talk about your research on neuroscience and are our minds really limitless?
Yeah, well, I'm going to share my screen so I can just share a few slides with you. And that is definitely what I am very happy to talk about today. Are our minds really limitless? And I have written a book which talks about, oh, first of all, our website, uCubed, if you want to visit it later on, particularly if you're in a quantitative field and would like to get some cool ideas about maths and maths learning. It's called ucube.org. But my book, I've written about 6 keys, and I call them keys as I think they are key pieces of information that allow us to live our lives differently and to learn differently. And the first key is about our brains. And in fact, all of these keys are informed by my work with the neuroscientists at Stanford. If you have comments or thoughts and would like to share anything in the chat box as I go, please do that and we can chat about things. But what I first want to say is this is not how it works, but this is what most people think, particularly students when they start to struggle on some maths in their classroom. They start to think, I haven't got a maths brain, and then things go downhill after that. So this is how it works. This is what the neuroscientists will tell you, that when we learn something, there's one of 3 things that can happen in your brain. One is when you first learn something, you start a new brain pathway that deepens as you learn more. Another possibility is you form a connection between pathways. And the third possibility is you strengthen pathways in your brain. These pathways are, nobody's born with them, but they're forming all the time that we're learning. And I wish that all students knew this because I think it's very important. So as well as neuroscience, I like to share cases of people. And this is an important one. His name is Nicholas Letchford. He grew up in Australia. And in 1st grade, his parents were told that he was learning disabled and he had a very low IQ. And at the first parents' evening, they were told that he was the worst child they'd seen in 20 years, couldn't read, make connections. Anyway, Nicholas is important because he graduated from Oxford University in 2018 with a doctorate in applied mathematics. Probably you'll agree that's a very high level of achievement. And he did that despite being born with significant disadvantages. So we know now, it's pretty clear that anybody can learn anything. Scientists try and find a limit to what people can learn, and they always come away saying they couldn't find it. There are no limits. If people have the right teaching and the right ideas, they can learn anything. So that's the first key I wrote about in my book. The second one is linked to it, and it's the importance of times of struggle. Turns out those are the very best times for our brains. This is a book where they went out and found the highest achieving people in different fields and found that they weren't born with anything in particular, but they all engaged in a particular kind of practice. It's important for all you learners and teachers. And it is a practice where you're at the edge of your understanding, making mistakes, correcting them, moving on. Being at that edge is the time that is the best for brain growth. And so it's not really about getting work correct all the time. That turns out to be not a very good workout for our brains. So I find that when we share with learners that it's good to struggle, I tell my students, I'm going to give you something hard to do. I want you to struggle because that's really good for your brain. And when they look at me and they say, oh, this is so hard, I say to them, that feeling of it being hard, it feels like that because your brain is growing. That is why it's so important. And I find that people not only learn better when they embrace struggle, but they start to live differently. We may have time to talk about that. But in my work, encouraging struggle with students, I interviewed for my book lots of teachers who have really taken this on. This was one of the teachers I interviewed in my book. Her name's Jen Schaefer, and she's a 5th grade teacher in Canada. And she says she shares this Post-it note all through her room and says to her kids, you've got to get on the steps of struggle. You don't need to be that cocky kid on the top step, but you don't need to be the sad one on the bottom step either. Those steps of struggle are really important. She said the kids like that metaphor. One they like even more comes from James Nottingham in England, the pit of struggle. It's really important to get into the pit. And this is the pit that her 5th grade teacher students made, where you can see as they're going down into the pit, they're saying things like, I'm so confused. But as they're coming out of the pit, they're saying, got to think harder, got to try harder. So these ideas are so important and haven't really come through our education system. I loved when I was talking to Jennifer that she said her kids come to her and they say, Miss Schaefer, I'm really in the pit. And she says her response to that is, that's excellent. What classroom tools do you need? And I love that response for a couple of reasons. One, she values them being in the pit. She says that's really good. And the second is she doesn't jump in and help them and structure the work and take out the struggle. She just says, what classroom tools do you need? If you would like to read more about the importance of making mistakes for your brain and of struggling, this is a really good summary that was recently released. So as teachers, we've kind of been trained to have students get work correct all the time. But as I said, that really isn't the best thing. And I was reminded of this international study of different teachers where they went to high achieving maths country, Japan, and found that they encouraged struggle about 44% of classroom time. And they saw that in the US less than 1% of the time. So if you're an undergrad, you've probably come through a school system where you haven't been given much opportunity to struggle and to value that. And so I find with my Stanford students, they come to Stanford, sometimes they struggle for the first time and they kind of fall apart because they don't think that's good. And so it's a really important message. So I've shared a couple of keys about brain growth and struggle. These really lead to the third key, which is having a growth mindset and believing that you can learn anything. Turns out what you believe will affect what you can do. And the evidence we have of this is pretty extensive now, and it goes into all sorts of different areas. In fact, I wanted to share a health study with you. This was a study conducted by researchers at Stanford, where they followed over 61,000 people over 21 years. And this is what they found. It's pretty interesting. The people who thought they were doing healthy exercise were actually healthier than the people who didn't think their exercise was healthy, even when it was exactly the same exercise. And in case you think this isn't so important, the negative thinkers were 71% more likely to die in the follow-up period. So it turns out what you believe about your body as well as what you believe about your mind has a lot of impact in all sorts of ways. So this is why This is a great study that was done looking at adults when they made mistakes. And these are actual voltage maps of brains from the study, where they found that when people had a growth mindset and they made a mistake, their brains were on fire with activity, that orange brain you see, compared to people with a fixed mindset. So this is really interesting to me because I think it is very clear evidence that what we believe about ourselves actually changes how our brains work. We actually saw it in this study. And that explains data like this, which comes from Carol Dweck. This is kids going through 7th and 8th grade with the kids, same teachers, but the kids on this upward trajectory are the kids who believe that they can learn and that struggle is good, which is probably not surprising that they're on this different trajectory if their brains are operating differently. So it's important to have a growth mindset. The good news is anyone can change their mindset at any time. And what I find that once people become aware of the science that I share in my book and in other places, they start to change. I actually work with Carol Dweck, who's the mindset guru at Stanford. And I wanted to share that she has recently changed her mind about mindset. We were presenting recently to a group of Australians before the pandemic. That's a picture from the event. And she shared that she used to think people had a fixed or a growth mindset. But now she realizes everybody has times of fixed mindset thinking. And what is important is to identify your own triggers, what pushes you into thinking, I can't do something. She even recommends giving a name to your trigger or your fixed mindset. She shared that day that she'd been presenting to a company when the CEO of the company said that he'd named his fixed mindset Dwayne. And he said, when we're under pressure, I become Dwayne and I get super critical and bossy. And one of the women in the company said, yes. And when your Dwayne comes out, my Iana comes rushing out and I become stressed and submissive. So really important to get in touch with your own feelings and what triggers you into that negative thinking. And it's probably no surprise to anybody here that when you have a fixed mindset and fixed ideas, that leads to anxiety with learning. And maths anxiety is particularly widespread, probably more widespread than this. Not just for low achieving people, all sorts of people. I've talked to mathematicians who share that they have anxiety around maths. And here's something interesting from the neuroscience. From Vinod Menon's group, they've found that when people who are anxious, when they see maths, a fear center lights up in their brain. It's the same fear center that lights up when we see snakes and spiders. And when that fear center lights up, the problem-solving centers of the brain shut down. So it's really important we don't, the teachers on this call, give students anxiety-inducing practices. I'm not a fan of time tests and other things that bring about that anxiety. So I do think that if you have these ideas, if you really have taken on the ideas of mindset, of struggle, that people go through life differently. I think if you live one day with a limitless perspective, you'll feel it, especially if it's a day when something goes wrong. But for learners, this isn't enough. There's more from the neuroscience that can really help learners. And this is why I do a lot of work in the K-12 system. And there, a lot of teachers have now jumped on this mindset bus or bandwagon. But here's the thing. If you share mindset messages with students and tell them you can learn anything, but then you present content in a fixed way. So in maths, I would refer to that as questions with one method, one answer, not an open way. Then it's very hard for students to take on these mindset messages. So I'm going to share a bit more of what I mean by that by telling you some more interesting neuroscience, which is that this group at Stanford have found that when anyone works on a maths problem, there are 5 different areas of the brain that light up. 5 pathways in the brain, and 2 of them are visual pathways. In fact, thinking visually is really important for mathematics. Not only is thinking visually important, but when we think about maths in different ways, not just as numbers, but also as words or pictures or other visuals, graphs, algorithms, tables, when we move with maths or build something with maths, it causes different pathways in the brain to be activated. So they know that the most effective brains, the most effective people, what characterizes their brains is they have more connections. So these important connections come about when we see and think about maths in different ways. And I want to give you an experience of this now. I'm going to give you a maths problem and get you thinking visually. So it looks like this, and I'm going to ask you to share what you see in the chat box. So my question is, here we have a pattern and a growing number of squares in these different cases. And I would like you to look at it and think visually, where do I see the extra squares? So maybe you can tell me in the chat box, where do you see them? If you want, you could describe it in a name. Where do you see the extra squares? I'm just going to give people a moment to share some thoughts in the chat box. Thank you, Matt, who has said on the outside. Kim says like an arrow going up, like a pyramid. You row to the bottom. I'm looking here at all the different ways people see it, which is something important that I want to share with you in a moment. Jax is like the inside is filling in and then the outward match. In the center. This is really great. Thank you for these comments. Well, as you share, I'm going to share with you some different ways people see this problem. I've given it out to lots of different people, school children, undergrads at Stanford, CEOs of companies, all sorts of people. Some great visuals being shared. And people see it in different ways. So I want to share a few of the different ways people see it. It was my undergrads at Stanford who described this as the raindrop method. Somebody, Brandt, said it's like Tetris. You could also think of it in that way. So they see the squares coming down from above and landing on the shape. But other people, and I saw this in the chat box, see squares adding to the bottom of the shape. What my undergrads described as a bowling alley method, like the row of Skittles coming in. Some people see what a teacher described to me as a volcano. The center leads and it's like the lava follows. And I think some people wrote about that center leading approach. It was a teacher who described this method to me as the parting of the Red Sea, a biblical reference there, where the shape parts and a new center comes in. Some people see a growth of triangles. They see that triangle shape on the outside. And some people see the empty triangles, or what we would call the negative space in mathematics, that develops on the outside. I love regional differences. This one came from when I was presenting with teachers in Boston. They said it's like when the snow melts and the buildings emerge out of the snow. I also love, this is one that a young man at Stanford shared with me. He said, I see the Minecraft tree. And that's the Minecraft tree he saw. And this is how he saw the growth. So that's a sideways growth on the shape, which is interesting. And then this one, always interesting to me, if you move the red square or squares each time, you see that the shape grows as a square. So this is what I wanted to share with you about this problem. You may remember, some of you in secondary maths classrooms, you were given patterns like this and you were asked how many squares are in the second case or the 10th case or the nth case. So what students do in that situation is they draw out a table of numbers and then they're expected to stare at that table until they notice that if you add one to the case number and square it, you get the total number of squares. Excuse me a moment, I've got something in my throat. And that actually gives us the n+1² function. It's a quadratic function. But I could have asked everybody to take their visual representation and describe it algebraically. What we would have is a whole room filled with different algebraic expressions, all of them equivalent to each other, all of them equivalent to n+1². And if we look at that method on the bottom right-hand corner, the square method, you actually see why it's n+1². It makes a square that's one more than the case number. So in case 1, it is a 2×2 square. And in case 2, it's a 3×3 square, hence the n+1². So when we give this out to students, we don't ask them how many. We ask them, what do you see first? And they then have these incredible conversations. I've worked with 5th and 6th grade students who can tell me why it's n+1². I once asked a group of high school teachers that, and they couldn't tell me why it was n+1² because they weren't prepared to think visually. So right here, we've had an opportunity of brain crossing as that visual representation has connected with that algebraic function. So this was an interesting study I was involved with, the PISA International Test. They're given out to 13 million students across the world. And in this particular year, they did an analysis of people's approach to maths. And we found something pretty stunning, that people who took a memorization approach to maths, thinking they had to just memorize methods, were the lowest achieving students in every country in the world. So we want to get away from that narrow memorization procedural approach. I'm excited at the moment because I'm one of 5 people that's rewriting the maths framework for California, and have a great state board president in California, and the governor is on board with some of these changes that I'm talking to you about. So the 5th key I want to share with you is the importance of thinking flexibly. This connects with the visual thinking. They've actually found that when they look at, in this study, they took students who were nominated by teachers as low and high achieving and looked at their math strategies. And they found that the high achievers didn't know more, but they were engaging in number flexibility. And this flexible thinking turns out to be really important. I love this book that is written by a physicist, and he talks about how, you know, in the Western world, we really value this algorithmic, rational thinking. But there's another kind of thinking that he talks about as flexible, creative, elastic thinking, and how the algorithmic thinking, although it's worshipped in Western society, it is a low-level God, and the higher God is flexible, creative thinking, the Zeus of human thought. He also points out, of course, that this algorithmic thinking can be performed by a computer, but that flexible, creative thinking, they're at ground zero at getting computers to engage in that. And that is what the human brain is ideally suited for. So we have it a little out of balance in our education system, in that everything is geared towards that algorithmic thinking, that actually a computer can do better than any humans. And we're not spending enough time developing these flexible, creative thinkers. Speed, though, it turns out, is the enemy of deep creative thought. And when we put people under time pressure, that creative part of their brain often shuts down. So having people be able to think and create things without the pressure of time is ideal. And then the final key is just the importance of collaboration. It's so important to 21st century work. In maths, it's particularly important. When you connect with somebody else's idea, it requires and develops more understanding. And what was interesting to me when we interviewed the 62 adults who were in my book, Limitless, they all talked about how they'd started to interact differently, particularly when they'd taken on the information about struggle, when they started to embrace times of uncertainty and to realize they didn't have to go around as an expert all the time. They could say to people, you know, I don't know the answer, but let's find out. They became more curious. They took on an approach of valuing multiple ways of working. And that meant that if somebody ever put a barrier in their way, they were able to go around it. But that taking on struggle really allowed people to collaborate really differently. And in the book, I talk much more about how to collaborate most effectively. But I have given you a very quick overview of the 6 keys in the book. I do believe that if you take these on, you'll see differences in your life. And I wanted to share with you a boy who has taken them on. So this is when it was filmed, was a middle school boy who I had been working with his teachers for a year, and they used to give maths as procedural worksheets, but they changed. And he talks about how he changed, and he's in a film that's coming out. So let's just have a listen to him. This, I think, is a limitless perspective.
Math class last year was notes and just handouts, and you were your own little box. You were just boxed in. You were like by yourself. It was every man for themselves. But now this year it's just open. We're a whole big, like, it's like a city. We're all working together to create this new beautiful world. I think the challenges and like the future that lies ahead for me, like oh, if I keep on pushing, if I keep on doing this, someday I'm gonna make it.
So that is a fantastic perspective to have, and it really came for him from 2 things. One, seeing maths differently, and the other, hearing those really important mindset messages. So what I'm talking about, these 6 keys, is very much in line with what we know from research about effective teaching and effective learning. So that was what I was going to share about being limitless. I have a few other things I'd like to share with you about our new data science initiative that we're bringing to K-12 education, but of course is very important K-16. I don't know if Teodoro or Carlos, you think I should pause at this point or share the data science and then we can pause and chat?
The only thing I would mention, thank you for that great presentation. I really enjoyed the book. We can get to this later, but one of the things that I really appreciated was your chapter 6 that talks about the work of Uri Treisman, and particularly the impact that some of your ideas have on minorities and women in math. So before we get to the data science, maybe you want to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, I can briefly say, I didn't have a slide on this, that Uri Treisman, when he was a mathematician at Berkeley, was noticing a lot of students failing calculus. And he instigated these workshops where people just talked about the ideas together. And within 2 years, the calculus failure had dropped to 0, and particularly impacting students of color. It was African-American students in particular who 60% of them were failing calculus. That, as I said, dropped to 0 within 2 years. So really fantastic. And a lot of universities took that on. We should have kids. And at first they studied why Chinese American students were so successful. And they found it was because they just did maths together. They would do their maths problems in the dorms and in the eating rooms. And so, you know, that collaboration turns out to be really important for everybody, and also for tackling inequities. So I will share about this because it's also very equity driven initiative, and I'll show you how and why that is. But why are we focusing on data science? I mean, statistics like this, I'm sure you will agree, are pretty incredible. We are in an amazing time where the world is filled with data. 90% of the world's data has been collected in the last 2 years. Everywhere you turn is big data. And so for students, this is a picture book we have on our website that we're helping them get the knowledge, both of data out there in the world, but also that they're giving away their data every time they interact online. And so data science, you may have experienced statistics. Data science is a little different. Stats tends to be taught, shouldn't be, but tends to be taught as a set of methods Whereas data science really starts with big data sets. And we encourage students to ask questions of those data sets. And the questions and discussions are very open. Students are learning technology to interact with that data. It's very cross-curricular subject and valuable in all sorts of fields, in all sorts of jobs. Data science is really important. And what I love about data science is, unlike mathematics, the field I am in, at the moment it's being communicated in very open ways. Anybody can become a data scientist. You take the courses and you will become a data scientist. We tend to have done something very different with maths. And in fact, I wanted to share that for generations, really, we have had only one maths pathway that we have really valued in schools. And that is the pathway to calculus. But calculus is a deeply inequitable system. It's the only AP course that requires kids to be advanced in middle school to get to it in high school, which has meant that schools make decisions when kids are in 6th grade often as to whether they get on that pathway. And of course, once you have a system where some kids go forward and some don't, then the inequities pile in, the parental pressure. And then we know that the higher colleges filter on calculus with calculus. So really, when we decide in 6th grade that a student's not going on that calculus pathway, we're not only closing calculus doors, we're closing the doors to colleges. So many problems with calculus. This was a study done in the Bay Area where they found that 60% of students were actually passing algebra in middle school and being put back into algebra in high school. So being put onto that low-level pathway. And when they looked into who they were, you can see some pretty awful data that the decisions people were being made were racial decisions, racist decisions. And so there's been a lot of problems in the school system around that. But also the nature of the maths we teach in high school, the algebra geometry sequence is actually designed in the 1800s, which is pretty mind-blowing, has not changed since then, even though the maths of our world has changed dramatically. And I got involved with this initiative when I received a phone call from someone a bit out of my usual realm, not a mathematician, not an educator. His name is Steve Levitt, and he is an economist. He wrote for economics, Harvard grad, I think. And he said, would you help me try and change high school maths? And I said, most definitely, yes, I will. And he put together this advocacy group. You can see the group there, not the sort of people I normally hang out with, but Nate Silver, who I'm sure is very busy at the moment, and some others. And the Freakonomics people asked on their website, what maths do you use in your daily life? So this is interesting. On this graph, we see the most commonly reported answers of daily and never. And I think you'll see there that what we traditionally teach, the algebra geometry, most people don't think they're using, but data analysis is extremely used a lot by people. They were worried that this was a biased data set because on the Freakonomics site, it's mainly men. And very professional men. So I repeated the survey with a large group of educators and as you can see, very similar results. So raises the question, are we teaching kids the right maths? And this particular data graph shows you the courses kids are in high school. And what you can see pretty clearly from that is we've taught algebra geometry over time to prepare kids for calculus, but most students don't take calculus. Probably on this call, there's a lot of people who did take calculus, but most students don't, and they're taking a lot of algebra in preparation for it, and then they leave mathematics. So I held a meeting in February where I I started off thinking I'm going to invite lots of open-minded mathematicians and we're going to sit down and figure this out. How do we broaden maths? It ended up being also data scientists and teachers and policymakers, all sorts of people. right before the pandemic was more known. And anyway, Stanford, it was a great day. Stanford made a press release and a little video of the event, which I'm going to share with you now.
We know that the mathematics curriculum that's currently in schools, the maths that students are learning, is really outdated. The world has changed dramatically in recent years, yet our maths curriculum has stayed the same. And in fact, the sequence of high school courses that are in the US, algebra, geometry, was actually created in the 1800s, which is kind of mind-blowing. So we really urgently need to teach kids the maths they're actually going to use in their lives and work and courses.
I believe data science really opens up, both within math classes, but more broadly within education, ways for children to become the discoverers of knowledge as opposed to the recipients of the brilliance of past generations. So at a very practical level, data science is useful because data science is increasingly becoming part of what you do.
We really need to get mathematicians at the table if we're going to change high school maths. So it started off with inviting about 10 mathematicians to come today at Stanford. We ended up having data scientists, there are high school teachers and policymakers are here, people from the universities are here. So we've really brought together those people that we think can make this movement happen.
This is a rare opportunity to gather with experts, other educators, researchers to discuss what is it going to really take to make data science education accessible and valuable for students.
It's a very exciting group that's been put together, and I think it shows tremendous promise for being able to actually spearhead a change. This change will happen. I think the opportunity is to make it happen in the best way possible, enfranchising the largest number of people as we go.
I believe that all of us need to know how to look at data, how to understand data, and to have the expertise to work in the modern economy. So much of every person's job in the future is going to involve some aspect of data, as we've seen data explode in terms of how it's being collected and how it's being used. I really think this is such an incredible opportunity to bring people together to make this change in the education system.
This really seems to have the potential to change the maths in school, change it from a very procedural, meaningless subject for most kids into something that they can see is useful in the world and feel empowered to use that mathematics in the world.
That video is on our website. You can revisit that. A couple more things and then we'll stop for questions. So people ask, oh, well, if we teach data science in school, will kids be cut off from different college careers? But actually, there's a lot of college majors that want people to have taken statistics or data science. As you can see there, I have been having lots of meetings at Stanford and I'm working at the moment to get a change in Stanford's admission statement where they value data science as highly as calculus for students coming to Stanford. The UC system has already paved the way for students to do that. I mentioned that I'm one of the writers of the California Maths Framework. We are going to highlight data science in that framework. When it comes out next year, it will be shown as one of the most important areas of mathematics. I'm also excited that data science can be very different to calculus. All students can be offered the course in high school. It won't require advancement in middle school. I think it's going to open the door to many more students, a more diverse group of students staying in STEM because of it. I'm excited about that. I'm also happy that it will help maths teachers realize that maybe you can engage kids in meaningful questions and they don't have to have one method and one answer. There's a tiny URL on this slide if you would like more to be involved with what we're doing, to be kept up to date with this data science movement. There's a survey that you can give us your email and we'll put you into that as you see there. And then a couple of other things and then I'll pause. At UCube, we're designing a high school course, a one-year course that's going to use free tools. We're doing this with Google. That will be available to the country and allow students to be have that data science course, and it will probably be an alternative to Algebra 2 if people want to take a data stats pathway instead of calculus, or some students might take both. If you'd like the tiny URL, I see Rana asked for that. It's actually tinyurl.com and then data science pres details, presentation details, DS pres details. I can put that up again at the end. And then just a few other things on our website. If you have K-12 people, you know, we have a new online class that's, well, this is for everybody, the K-16. If you'd like to know about the ideas of data science, there's an online class that gets you into some of those ideas. And then we also have lessons and other things. So lots of things on our website. You can go to the data science tab and it will share that video that I just shared with you, an op-ed that I wrote with Steve Levitt, lots of things. So that's what I wanted to sort of formally present, but I'm happy to chat about any of this, about the data science initiative, about being limitless, about seeing maths visually, collaborating, really any of these ideas.
Joe, I think Theodora may have a question, but you may also want to, we've been getting some questions through the Q&A as well. So you may want to have a look at those and answer as you'd like. Yeah,
I would suggest that we go to the Q&A. Eugenia Katsigris has posted one a long time ago. Okay. How do you explain strengths and weaknesses, which so many people used to argue against? Anyone can learn anything. Is it just that strengths are what we have worked hard on in the past and weaknesses are the things we haven't put time into?
Absolutely, yes, I would say is the answer to that, Eugenia. You're right. People do sort of very early on decide that people have some strengths and people have some weaknesses. And I mean, we are born with different brains. I'm not saying that everybody's born with an identical brain, but what we're born with just pales into insignificance compared to all the millions of opportunities we have in our lives. So, but as soon as, if somebody has really worked on something, maybe as a baby, you get lots of pattern toys and building, and then you're going to already start school with more of a, you know, ability to think in mathematical ways. So, and then they decide, oh, you're a maths person, and the whole pathway is set out. It's absolutely to do with the experience people have, and we can change that at any time. Anybody can develop the mathematical parts of their brain or any other parts.
And again, Joe,
yeah,
feel free to take anonymous questions and pick ones that are interesting for you to answer.
I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions at all.
As someone with aphantasia, I can not visualize in my mind. What is your advice in respect to what you have talked about today? Yeah, very interesting question.
Very
We're all different kind of learners, different abilities. Yeah.
And, you know, we have a section on our website, UCubed, about special education and people that are born with, you know, brain differences. I don't know about that particular one. I mean, a lot of the forefront of neuroscience right now is taking people with particular brain differences, whether it's dyslexia or anything, and building the brain pathways they need through targeted work. I don't know if they've worked with people with this particular learning difference, so I don't know what's going on with that. But I would think that if you're visualizing parts of your brain are not strong, then the touch parts of the brain would be, or the touch experiences would become a lot more important. We can build and experience building and touching. In fact, I work with a robotics professor, engineering professor at Stanford, and we do a lot of work around building things that develop other perceptions in the brain from touch. I didn't share today, but one of the amazing things from neuroscience is that our finger perception is really important, and people who know their fingers better do better on maths. And when you train yourself to develop your finger perception, your maths achievement goes up. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, I would think that if we have any particular area of our brain that's compromised, then developing those other areas that will be the most will be really helpful.
Dr. Boaler, just to follow up on this touch idea and how it influences math, you mentioned in your book the link between music and math. You know, I've always heard about it. I never believed it. I said, how come somebody who does well in music can also do well in math? But you do have an explanation in the book. So will you?
Yeah. I mean, that one's been a really interesting puzzle for many years. People have noticed that a lot of mathematicians play instruments. There seems to be some sort of link, and certainly we could explore what the patterning of music does for a mathematical thinking. But what they now know is finger perception is a large part of that, where many musicians use developing their finger perception by playing an instrument. And we now know finger perception leads to greater maths achievement. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so let me ask, here's a question that came from a student. Am I correct in thinking that struggle is actually conducive to academic success or grades, rather than the other way around, with grades and struggle being mutually exclusive?
Oh yeah. Definitely. So struggle is the best time for your brain. I mean, this is such an important message. Finding work difficult is the best thing that can happen to you, because that will put you in that place of struggle. And I don't think many students know this. And a lot of students think if I struggle, that means I'm not cut out for this work. And quite the opposite. And in fact, we see that the most successful people in life are those who keep going through that struggle. And that's because that struggle is going to really help them. So yeah, I think this message is important from the Stanford undergrads I teach. They're the ones I have class with at 1 o'clock. And previous classes of my undergrads have said to me, I only stayed in maths because I got these messages, or I only stayed in my major, or I was able to keep going when I got a B because I learned that this is good. This is actually good for me. So yeah, I think it's a really important one.
Here's another one from another student. How do we exercise the flexibility and depth key when in reality our school calendars are filled with deadlines?
Yeah, it's a hard one because flexible deep thinking happens when we're not under pressure. And I definitely experienced this myself. I have to say, I'm a swimmer, and it's pretty compromised at the moment with the pandemic, but normally I swim in the mornings, and I often have my best ideas while I'm doing lengths of the pool. And they similarly, have found that when people are really stuck in the middle of their schedules, they just take a walk. And they find that they have these great insights. They know this now, that our brains are really, they're at their best when we are away from the deadlines. And so it would be great to redesign the whole school system to encourage flexibility and take away all these stresses. But even in the absence of that, I would say take a walk or go for a swim, or just try and do something different that frees the brain for that really important thinking.
Yeah, a lot of people practice meditation, for example.
Meditation, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Joe, one question that came in through the chat, let me just read it. My daughter's in 6th grade, it's from Christina. How do I keep her confident and engaged in math? It doesn't come naturally to her, but I tell her it doesn't come naturally to most people, including me. It's something we have to work at. She absolutely loves building and engineering.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, you should tell her that it doesn't come naturally to anyone at all, really. But, and we all have to work at it. And when we work in different ways, it unlocks a lot of things. But I would say that something that's been very helpful for a lot of students is an online class I have on the website. If you go to YouCubed and courses, there's a free student class. It's for students of any grade. It's 6 15-minute sessions, not very long. It significantly changes kids' mindsets and their approach to maths. It shares some ways of thinking. We've studied it in randomized controlled trials. Kids who take it achieve at high levels across, not just in maths, actually. Kids who take it do better in English and science. So I would definitely recommend that online class. We also on the website have lots of tasks, lots of things for you to read as a parent. We have a whole K-8 book series called Mindset Mathematics, and you could buy her the 6th grade book. So lots and lots of resources on YouTube. I recommend you go and spend some time there.
Yeah.
We've got lots of questions that are saying, can you make your slides available? Can you just
yeah, sure. I can. Now we're recording this, and I think people can watch the recording later. And I'm going to send a PDF of the slides, so it won't include the videos, but the videos are all on our website if people would like to see those again. Yeah.
So Reggie asked a very wide question. PK-12 curricula and high school graduation standards differ by states. Agree with your ideas about teaching math differently, but the question is how to change the long-standing process of teaching math.
Yeah, I mean, it does happen by states. I do know, though, that states listen to each other and watch what's going on. So, and I see a lot of good thinking going in lots of different states at the moment. The state of Oregon has decided that kids in high school will only do 2 years of required classes now, maybe geometry, algebra, and then they stop. They say they've done enough algebra at that point, and or algebra, geometry, so that they don't do that first year of algebra, and then they're offering them choices. One is data science, another is calculus, more algebra, another is discrete maths, another is mathematical modeling. So we're definitely seeing movement in different states now. They're reconsidering the high school pathways. Now, we need movement across the whole system, up and down college, down to K, but that I see if high school maths can actually change, that's a pretty hopeful sign, I think. So I agree, we need these ideas everywhere, but it's definitely moving around the country. And when the California framework will come out next year, that will also be read in other states. And so it's good, change is happening.
Yeah, Professor Moser from CLU says, my daughter is a high school math teacher. Which Boaler book is best recommended to introduce her to this to her?
Great question. I would go for a book called Mathematical Mindsets. It's really the book for maths teachers. And it has all these ideas, but really translated in what does that mean for my maths teaching. That book was really very successful. It's been translated into lots of languages, and but lots of readers of that book said to me, you have to get these ideas out, not just to maths teachers, which is why I wrote Limitless Mind. But if she's a maths teacher, then Mathematical Mindsets is a good book for her.
Yeah, so let me go to one more student. Would you qualify any part of, if not all of, this learning style as non-linear thinking?
Non-linear thinking, I guess so. I haven't really thought about it with that particular framework, but I think that is definitely where the 21st century is heading, to more flexible, creative thinking, as I talked about, and recognizing that a lot of the more linear thinking is what computers do really well, and we can give that work to computers and spend more time engaging in creative, flexible thinking that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, question for you. That your book came out a little over a year ago. I think it was September of last year, and the world has changed quite a bit in that period of time. Tell us a little bit about how your teaching has changed and how you've seen education change in that time.
Well, of course, the big change is the pandemic we're all in, which is challenging for all of us. I think really challenging for teachers like myself who want to give people a creative, collaborative maths experience. And so I'm actually doing that in case there are teachers out there interested. As I mentioned, I have class at 1, and what we're doing in class is what I do in lots of classes. I put kids into breakout rooms and give them a Jamboard link, which is an interactive online whiteboard, and invite them to jump in and draw and visualize and do interesting creative maths on that whiteboard. I can go around and look at the whiteboards as they're developing. Sometimes I don't like jumping into their Zoom groups, I like doing that in the classroom, wandering around and being in groups, but I don't know, Zoom's a little different. So anyway, I think that the pandemic brings some interesting, I mean, in my more hopeful thinking about it is that maybe it will prompt a great rethink of education and what we should be doing with kids and do something different. I've been asked, because of the pandemic, I've been asked by the state of California to highlight the maths that's more important for teachers, which I'm very excited to do. So it prioritizes what's important and lets go of some of those areas of maths that really nobody uses anymore. So, you know, there are maybe some good things coming out of this. So that's exciting. In my last class, I invited Conrad Wolfram to come to class. You saw Conrad in that short video about our data science meeting. He's somebody who's really arguing for a whole different maths approach. He's just released a book called The Maths Fix. And his question is, when are we going to start teaching maths as though computers exist? Which I think is a really important question. His team at Wolfram, which by the way, their technology powers both Siri and Alexa. They're pretty amazing maths group. They have been developing a high school curriculum that has taken out any calculation by hand that a computer would do in real life. And so that's allowed lots of time for kids to be modeling and building and working on important maths, and then they use a computer to do the calculations. So I think that's pretty exciting. And we're sharing, when Conrad came to Stanford for the meeting, we also recorded a presentation from Conrad, that's on our website too. Some really cool mathematical thinkers on the website.
Great. So Dan is asking, the chart indicating which topics people use every day and never is illuminating. I think it's a huge problem that spreadsheets are not emphasized at every level. Have you found any schools with a curriculum that emphasizes them?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. It's, you know, some high schools teach statistics, but it's pretty much the poor neighbor of calculus. So they push the kid off and push kids into calculus instead. And it is so important, both stats and data science, which is kind of, I guess, a more modern version of stats in some ways. So there are schools that are doing a good job with that, but I don't think it's the norm at all. What I've been excited about, so I made an online class introducing the ideas of data science to teachers, and I had to record it in my upstairs room because the pandemic had already set in. But we managed to get it out in August. That was our push, to try and get it out while teachers were still on their vacations. And 30,000 teachers took it this summer. And what's great is they're so excited about these ideas of data science. We have a section on our website called Data Talks, which are just lots of lovely data visualizations that teachers can show to their kids and get them to talk about and explore. And a lot of excitement, especially from K-8 teachers who really want to bring this into their kids. So I think we're going to see some really important shifts with more data science, more stats in education over the next few years.
What's your opinion about the prerequisite requirements in many STEM curricula? For example, can calculus be waived as a requirement for engineering major?
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting one. I think when I talked to the engineers at Stanford about this broadening our admission statement, some of them were like, oh, well, we have to have calculus. We're engineers, we need calculus. It was very interesting to me talking to the provost of Stanford University. Her name's Persis Drell. She was head of the engineering department. And she's a physicist really by training, but she said, oh yeah, calculus. I mean, the ideas are really important, but you'd really program a computer to do it. So why don't we focus on that and have more time spent on the ideas rather than, you know, the traditional AP calculus class. So I mean, definitely calculus is important. And it probably is very important for engineers, but nobody is saying that calculus is not important. It's more like we need to broaden the maths that we value, but definitely calculus could be taught differently, as if computers exist. And the course that is the prerequisite is probably not what is really needed. Could be a wholly different course. And maybe a data science course could be the prerequisite. Certainly, I think kids could do data science in school and then take calculus in college. I don't think you have to take calculus in school by any means. There's some pretty amazing data that shows that 80% of kids who take calculus in school either retake it in college or take a lower level course in college. So, you know, I think we need to blow up the whole calculus system because it's not been serving us well, I think.
Here's another question, and I think comes from a student as well. How do you sustain this growth mindset? Often when I do not achieve the grade I wish on exams, even though I feel like I know the material, I get discouraged and get stuck into the idea that I am limited and I simply cannot handle the material.
Mm-hmm. Well, that first right off is great awareness that you're going into a fixed mindset, and that's what Carol Dweck talks about. Understand those triggers, and then we'll be able to deal with them better. And so I guess if you really immerse yourself in the research, and if you know these ideas, you don't have those moments, or they get less and less and less. And you recognize there's no point in me lapsing into thinking I can't do this, because actually I can do this. Or maybe I need to do something, learn something to get there. But so yeah, I think it's really good that you are thinking about those times, and then that will help not have those times happen.
Yeah, I think of changing something that we do, using other resources, that's, I think, a really great way to move forward and find other ways to continue on with the growth mindset and keep that going. Mm-hmm. And remembering that performance on one exam does not determine your entire life after that. Yes.
Right. I read a great book recently written by mathematicians about all the times they've struggled. It's a whole selection of chapters of mathematicians talking about struggle, and all of them talk about courses they failed. And, you know, what did they do after they failed that course? I mean, it's rarely just an easy pathway where you just pass everything, and everybody struggles.
Yeah, and that does bring up the question of how do we in education, what is the way we evaluate our students? Are we really evaluating them in the right ways?
Yeah.
What are the methods? And I see here one question says, does that mean exams should be more of the take-home type instead of a timed hour? So the time pressure is your lead. So maybe you can comment on all of that.
Yeah, we're definitely assessing it in the wrong ways. And I'm thrilled to see the demise of the SAT in California, at least. And although other states are doing more SAT work, so it's, yeah, we're definitely assessing kids. I mean, the whole education system over the years has been geared up to value the memorizers who can memorize their way through tests. And that's not the knowledge we should be valuing. We should be valuing these broader ways of thinking. So that doesn't come through in a timed multiple choice test. It's definitely better to give untimed or also more creative problems to solve as assessments, where people have to go and actually solve a problem or share their reasoning and thinking. Definitely one of the impacts of the pandemic, you should not be asking questions a computer can answer, or computers will be used to answer them. Ask about students' thinking and get them doing creative things for assessments.
Joe, your comments on calculus were particularly interesting to me. You actually had a chance to teach calculus last summer, I remember. So tell us about, you had the opportunity to teach it differently. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, I did. And this is also on our website, actually. So I was given 100 undergrads coming into Stanford, and they were either in the first gen program or they were in an engineering program, but had somehow been flagged as vulnerable. And they were offered a summer class, so 100 undergrads, and I forget how long we had them for, but we decided to teach calculus. We knew that some of them had I don't know, done BC calculus by the time they were freshmen in high school. Others had finished maths at Algebra 2. So we thought, what do we do with this huge spread of people? And so we decided to teach calculus through big conceptual ideas. We thought this will help people who've gone through that rush of calculus. It will also help people who've never seen it. And so that's what we did. And we used Steve Strogatz's book called Infinite Powers, which is a lovely book about calculus. It's the history of the ideas, why are they important. If you're a calculus student, I strongly recommend, or even if you're not, reading Infinite Powers. And he talks about the big ideas of calculus, and we based our teaching around those big ideas. And then we got the students to physically build things and to walk the line of a graph with a motion detector, and to feel acceleration rather than just read about it. So yeah, and we shared the ideas on our website. It's under the calculus bit of our website.
Okay. Another question, what about math and age? I've heard mathematicians do their best work when young. Can growth mindset, limitless mindset inform older math learners or older persons using math in their career?
I think that's such a bad practice in math. They have this thing about valuing mathematicians who are under 30, and that these are the times that people can come up with amazing things. And I just think that's terrible. I think that people come up with amazing ideas and learning when they're in, lots of ages of their lives. And brain growth happens at any time. It is true that younger people are able to kind of like sprout those brain connections faster in a more efficient way than us as we get older, but still the potential for brain growth is always there. It's not the case that brains cannot keep growing. In fact, some of the first evidence of neuroscience came from adults, taxi drivers who were learning complex routes. And one of the studies I share in the book was actually done in a retirement home, where they looked at which activity in the retirement home causes greatest brain growth. And they found it was any activity that was new to people caused the most brain growth. So yeah, I don't agree. I mean, I definitely think we can learn and do amazing things when we're older. And it's really important to know that. One of the worst things to do for our brains when we're older is to retire, even though that's what most people do. And it's really important when you're in older years to keep your mind really active.
Exactly. Yeah, so Alison Foreman asks, what if you are good at memorizing a standardized test?
Mm-hmm.
Are you of no value to the future? How can we counsel children who do excel in traditional formats to seek new knowledge and self-challenge?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, it's a skill to be able to memorize well and reproduce things, and it's a part of a breadth of knowledge that is valuable. It's just one part of it, and there's all these other things. But unfortunately, when people have been really good at memorizing and doing procedural maths, they're sometimes resistant to even being asked to think creatively or flexibly, because they just say, well, I can calculate and come up with an answer. And so that's why change can be hard. There was a really interesting study I just read. It was actually a study done by Harvard engineers. I think they were engineers. Yeah, they were engineers. And they compared teaching calculus the traditional way with teaching calculus through big ideas and struggling more and thinking. And the interesting finding was the students thought their learning was best in lectures, but they actually did better in the struggling conceptual thinking times. But they didn't think they were doing well because they were struggling. So in lots of different measures, they positively rated the lectures they got. They said they would like more of them, they learned most, but it turned out they weren't learning most. They were learning most in the struggle, conceptual thinking time. So we need to help people understand that struggle, creative thinking, these are all really important.
Yeah. Do you think oral exams are better than paper exams? Is there a better way to assess?
Definitely a better way to assess. I think broad assessment is the best way. I don't think we should assess people in any particular one format. I mean, it could include oral, it could include some written, it could include building and making. So yeah, I think if we want to be fair to people, we would really have assessments that involve people working in many different ways.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you know, this little bit, you mentioned this in the book, and I think it's valuable for people who come from backgrounds that are pretty tough. You know, some people have come to this country as refugees from different countries. They have struggled, maybe coming out of, you know, poverty or something like that. And you mentioned that a lot of very successful people in this world have actually come from those kind of backgrounds.
Right.
So what did it make them get to the point of success?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the studies I talk about in the book is one of these really broad studies where they analyze super successful people like Oprah Winfrey, and what they find is a very large proportion of people who are very successful have dealt with severe problems and disadvantages in their lives, whether it's, you know, parents breaking up, or things like parents on drugs, or all sorts of different things. People have had really hard upbringings, but the people with the hard upbringings, there's a much higher percentage of them in great success than people who've had easy upbringings. So they conclude from that getting used to kind of hardship and keeping going is a really important learning. And of course, there are people who have hardship and don't end up in great success. But if you can get through and develop the mindset that, you know what, I can get over barriers, I've had barriers in my life, that is going to likely lead you to be a more resilient adult. So yeah, it's very interesting. It seems that challenges, in a way, are a good training for kids as they're growing up.
Yeah, and what you also mentioned in there, that all of those people have had some ways of some community that helped them get through tough times.
That's right. People talk about that. When I got through this really tough time, I had support from, and then it's, you know, sometimes a friend, sometimes a family member. That does seem to be a part of the sort of journey of those people who've gone on to great places.
Yeah, or a co-worker or a colleague or something. So there's the community is extremely important, and so
Yeah.
as we need to keep building that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting question also: students in Asian countries tend to do better in math, according to study. Does culture have an impact on math learning?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the Asian countries that are very successful are also the countries where they don't believe in a maths gene. They believe everybody can be successful. And they also believe that people work together. It's very interesting. If you look at the culture of places like Japan and China, they believe in the collective good. They look at America and see it as a country of valuing individuals. And there's a metaphor, I can't remember where I read this, of like if a nail is rising up in a plank and there's a nail rising up, you'd like hammer it down so they're all level. Whereas in America, you do the opposite of that and you pull it out and celebrate it. And so, yeah, there's lots of things about culture that really make a big difference, I think, to how people learn. But the mindset ideas and the ideas of working and helping each other are really big in the more successful cultures.
And here's one more very broad question. Is there a shared understanding of learning?
That's a great question. I think not, which is part of why we have a lot of things happening in the education system that we probably don't think are very positive learning, because some people think it's really great learning to memorize and do well on SATs, and other people see learning as something really different to that. So I think there's a lot of definitions of learning, and maybe it would be good if we all sat down and talked more about learning.
Carlos, how about you? We have 5 more minutes.
Okay, Joe, you talk in your book about the PISA results and the U.S. standing in terms of this global test, and comment on that and what you see as the issues that the U.S. has versus the rest of the world, and especially in STEM.
Yeah, we could, I guess, wrap up on this question, because I'm thinking that soon I have to get those undergrads going. But yes, PISA is very interesting. The US does not do well in PISA tests. PISA does assess a little bit more interestingly than a lot of tests that are used in schools anyway. They do try and get at more problem solving, which is probably why students in the US don't do very well. They did a really interesting thing recently, though, where they gave out a test of collaborative problem solving. Students still took it individually, but they had to interact with a computer agent and together solve a maths problem. So what was really interesting is the boys do better than girls on that individual timed problem, but in the collaborative problem solving tests, girls did better than boys in all 51 countries. So it was very interesting that shows you just vary something about the test, doing it individually, collaborating with an agent, and huge differences come about from students. So yeah, I think what the PISA people are doing is pretty interesting. I like what they're doing. I like they just released 2021 maths framework. It's really worth looking at. It really values data. It also values creative, flexible thinking. It's really saying this is the maths we should be focusing on going forward. And I like it a lot.
Thank you very much. I think this is a good place to wrap up, and we'll give you some time to get ready for your next class. Thank you. Thank Theodora.
Yeah,
and
really great.
Joe, any closing comments you'd like to make?
Come to UCubed if you'd like to see more. UCubed.org has a lot of these ideas and TED Talks and all sorts of things. And keep having a growth mindset. It's very important. And I really enjoyed talking to you, Theodora and Carlos, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Okay.
And lots of thank yous are coming in the chat here from students I see. And
again, we will be distributing the video, and we will get copies of your slides, and there's a lot of interest in that as well. So we really appreciate your time.
Great.
All the best.
See you soon then, Carlos. Bye, everybody.